All right, so this is the 4.4 simple trinomials. This is with a negative first term. So this is the one where we go factoring ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is -1. Okay, so the process with how we do these is exactly the same, except number 6 down here says x squared can never be negative. If it is negative, you must take out a GCF of -1 from each term. So you write this in your notes there. You're looking for a GCF of -1 every time. Okay, so I'm going to take that out first. Then I'm going to do exactly the same process. So let's look at the example. All right, so first example here. Since you'll notice the very first term is negative, the first term can never be negative. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and factor out a greatest common factor of -1. Well, if I do that, here's what's going to happen. All of these signs, if I take a negative away from them, are going to change. So the x squared goes from negative to positive, 14 goes from positive to negative, and 32 goes from positive to negative. Okay, now what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to always circle this. I always circle this and draw an arrow down here so that I don't forget it, because I'm telling you it's going to happen. Everybody does it that way. That's why I always circle and draw an arrow, because now I'm going to go through and figure out my factors. So in this case, A is 1, B is -14, C is -32. So I need factors of A times C, which is -32, -32 times 1, that add up to -14. Well, again, for 32, I'm looking at 2 and 16. Again, it's got to be -32. So if I go there, or if I go 2 and -16, I want this to add up to be -14. Well, if I add these guys up, that's +14. Sorry, you're out. So it's -16 and +2. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these out. So it's going to be -16x, +2x. Bring down the -32, bring down the x squared. All right, so now group the first two and the last two. Just a reminder, you can pause it and stop it whenever you need to write things down, because I am going through this a little bit quick. So, first two terms, going to take out an x. If I take out an x, I'm left with an x and a -16. Biggest number that goes into 2 and 32 is a 2. They both don't have x's, so I don't have an x out there. And I'm left with an x and a -16. So, I've got an x minus 16 in common. I have an x plus 2 left over, and I can't forget that arrow, because that arrow tells me I've got a -1 out in front. Okay, so every time you have a negative first term, you always have to take out that negative. All right, let's look at the second example now. All right, so again, first term is negative, so I'm going to take out a -1. When I do that, every sign is going to change. So x squared becomes positive, 13 becomes negative, and 12 becomes positive. Circle it, draw your arrow. Okay, so I got A is 1, B is -13, C is 12. So A times C, that's 12. I need factors of 12 that add up to -13. Okay, this one's a little bit more tricky, because I got 12 and I've got 12 and 1, or 1 and 12. But do 1 and 12 add up to -13? No, they add up to +13. Well, what happens if I make these both negative? Is -1 times -12 +12? Well, sure it is. Negative times negative becomes positive. And do these two add up to be -13? They sure do. So this is going to be -1 and -12. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this guy, replace it. negative 1x, negative 12x. Bring down the 12, bring down the x squared. Parentheses, first two and last two terms. First two terms, I'm going to take out an x. Left with an x and a minus 1. Biggest number that goes into 12 and 12 is 12. And I'm going to be left with an x, and positive 12 divided by negative 12 is negative 1. So, I've got an x minus 1 in common, and an x minus 12 left over. And don't forget, at the very end, you have that arrow there for a reason, to put in a negative 1. Okay, so you should be able to complete now page 2 of your class kick examples.